Okay, Billy, so we're talking about junior wages today. What happened last week?
So this was a major story at the end of last week. So some of Australia's biggest union groups have called on the Fair Work Commission, which is Australia's workplace regulator, to abolish junior pay for workers between the ages of 18 and 20. So like you said in the intro, young employees across a range of industries, including fast food and hospitality, where a lot of young people are working, currently earn below the minimum award wages for adults. And what the unions are saying is that if someone is legally considered an adult, so over the age of 18 and they can vote, they can drink, then they should be paid as an adult.
You've mentioned the word junior pay, and I guess for me, when I heard this story last week, I was surprised to think of anyone over 18 categorised as a junior. So can you tease that out a little bit more? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, I'm the same. I have to admit my ignorance. I actually didn't know that this was a thing, that there was a difference if you were 18 versus 21. So this all relates to something called awards, which many employees are subject to in different industries, and they set out minimum pay and working conditions. And in all awards, there is something called junior rates, which apply to people under the age of 21. Now, award wages are different in all industries. So there's an award wage for journalism, there's one for fast food, for hospitality. But let's take the fast food industry as an example, because I think it's, again, where lots of young people work. I actually worked at Domino's, so I thought it was applicable to me and I wanted to use it as an example.
And it's shaped Billy's terrible taste in pizza to this day.
That is true. But getting back to the topic. So under the fast food industry award, a 15-year-old is entitled to just 40% of the adult minimum wage. So the minimum hourly rate for an adult fast food employee is about $25, and a 15-year-old is entitled to 40% of that, which is just $10. Now, that increases by 10% every year until an employee is 21. And so if we look at an 18-year-old, which is where this push is targeted at, they are entitled to 70% of the minimum award, which in this example means they can get $17.50, which is a difference of $7.50 for every hour, which is a big difference when you add that up.
Especially when you started off telling me about the 15-year-old entitlement, 40% sounds like a lot less than what an adult earns. But when you think of 15-year-olds, that's a kid. Everyone knows that kids get paid less than adults. I'm just really surprised by this junior rate for 18-year-olds. I think also the reason maybe I didn't know I was getting paid junior rates when I was that age is because I had a dodgy cash in the hand hospo job.
Yes, that is another issue, which we should do another episode on. But so that is what these unions are wanting to change. They want all 18-year-olds to be entitled to the same pay as their co-workers. And the body responsible for settling this is the Fair Work Commission, which, as I mentioned, is the national workplace regulator. And they are the ones who the unions are appealing to change this.
So what have the unions said about why they believe this is important? Why now?
Well, the group leading this is the Australian Council of Trade Unions, or the ACTU, and they are the peak body for unions in Australia. They're made up of nearly 40 smaller unions. And like I said, they are asking for these junior rates to be scrapped for anyone legally considered an adult. The ACTU Secretary Sally McManus said, quote, "Young people don't get discounts on their rent or grocery bills, so why should they get youth wages?" And the National Secretary, Jared Dwyer, from one of the unions representing retail and fast food workers, said 18 to 20-year-olds are adults in the eyes of the law. They can vote, drink alcohol, and join the army. Why are they paid as juniors?
It's so interesting. How does Australia stack up when we think about other countries? Is this a pretty standard treatment for workers between 18 and 21?
Yeah, I think that's a point worth exploring, because there are some other countries who did have junior wages but have now either limited them or in some cases just abolished them entirely. So in New Zealand, for example, 16 to 19-year-olds earn 80% of the minimum wage for the first 6 months of their job before moving on to the full minimum wage. And that change was actually made back in 2002.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
over 20 years ago.
So we're saying over 20 years ago in New Zealand, they made a change that means if you're 16 to 19, you've proven yourself for 6 months in a job, then there's that incentive to stick around, to have
Exactly.
loyalty to an employer, because then you've got a direct incentive to get a pay increase.
Yes. And in Canada, that is another country that has identified this as an area that they wanted to change. And nearly all provinces there don't have any lower pay rates for 18-year-olds. So all that's to say that there is precedent for this in other countries.
Hello, I'm James and I produce the video you're watching. If you're enjoying what you're watching, we'd love it if you considered subscribing and checking us out on our other platforms. It'd really help in getting the word out about what we're doing here at TDA. Thanks very much, and now back to the deep dive.
So obviously when we're talking anything unions, workers' rights, fair work, award rates, we have to, of course, think about how the businesses have responded to this. Have we heard anything from industry groups on that side?
Yeah, there's a constant battle between the unions and the business councils. And I guess unsurprisingly, they have been quite critical of it. I'll read out the response from the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which is the country's largest business group. They said that scrapping junior pay rates is unrealistic, and they claimed that it was, quote, another example of the usual ignorance of economics from unions. And their policy chief, David Alexander, said scrapping junior pay rates would make hiring young people far less attractive to businesses. He continued, taking on a worker with minimal experience requires extra risk and extra effort. They do not have the work or life experience that older adults have. And so just to wrap that up, his argument basically is that this would actually be catastrophic for young workers, those are his words, because employers would be less inclined to hire them.
Yeah, I think that those comments were really interesting, because this idea of the kind of extra effort or risk that a business might take on to have a young employee, I can kind of get my head around that if we're thinking about, 15-year-old Billy rocking up to Domino's, her first job. She doesn't know how to put tomato paste on a pizza base.
I was actually pretty talented.
I get that, but how do you kind of hold that level up against an 18 or a 19-year-old? Or what's the difference between a 20-year-old employee and a 21-year-old employee, apart from what they're getting paid? So pretty strong words from the business sector. What about the government?
Yeah, so to be clear, the Fair Work Commission is a government agency, and the Employment Minister, who is Tony Burke at the moment, he can request reviews of award rates. So he can put pressure on the Fair Work Commission to change this.
But ultimately, it's the Fair Work Commission that has to make the decision.
Exactly. Now, TDA reached out to Tony Burke, and he didn't indicate if he would call for a review of junior rates. So basically, he didn't say too much, but he did point out recent government efforts to create secure jobs and better pay, such as criminalising wage theft. So he basically said, we're not focusing on this right now, but look over here at all of the other stuff that we are doing. Now, TDA also reached out to the opposition and the Shadow Employment Minister, Michaelia Cash, who urged unions and the government to focus on, quote, proposals which will increase productivity and lead to higher sustainable wage growth. So basically not really supporting this either.
Not really supporting this, but not really not supporting it. It's very kind of, no one seems to want to really put their foot in it either way.
Exactly.
So we've heard from the unions, we've heard from the business groups, government kind of sitting on the fence a little bit maybe. What happens next?
Well, the unions have now lodged a formal application with the Fair Work Commission, which the Fair Work will review, and they will call on key stakeholders, so unions, workers, experts and businesses, to give evidence on this. And then they will come up with a decision, but we are not expecting that decision until 2025. So remains to be seen what happens next.
Watch this space, and if you age out into being 21 in that time,
Bad
congrats.
luck.
Billy, that was so interesting. Thank you so much for explaining all things junior pay rates to us today. If you learned something from this episode, please send it to a friend or someone you think might enjoy it. And make sure you are following the Daily Aus wherever you listen to your podcasts to ensure that there is an episode waiting for you every weekday morning. We'll be back tomorrow. Until then, have a great day.